Good morning or afternoon, and welcome to our final day of the third annual Nat King Cole Generation Hope Music Educators Conference entitled Music Education Now More Than Ever. My name is Edrick Rhodes, and I am honored to have been your facilitator for the last 2 days. Currently, I serve as the Director of Curriculum and Administration in the Education Division at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. Throughout the past couple of days, we've been very fortunate to have 6 incredible presenters from various parts of the country sharing their knowledge, experience, and perspectives on music education. Today, we end our virtual conference with 3 more extraordinary music educators sharing promising practices that you can input into action in a few weeks as we embark on another new school year. The recordings of Tuesday's, yesterday, and today's sessions will be available in the upcoming weeks on YouTube. So we encourage you to catch up on anything that sparked your attention for a deeper dive. Now, I will pass the virtual mic to Shauna St. John, the Executive Director of Nat King Cole Generation Hope. Hi, Shauna. You're muted.
Oh, I'm not unmuted anymore. Hi, how are you?
That's right.
Hello, everyone. As Edrick said, I'm Shauna St. John. I'm the Executive Director of Nat King Cole Generation Hope, and we are honored to have all of you here with us today. Our mission is to provide access to music education, and this is one of our premier programs that we currently have. We cultivate opportunities and we fund programs for instruction, mentoring, and resources. Some of the other programs that we have, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at our website, which I invite you to, please. We have a summer strings camp and a summer jazz camp, which we host for children anywhere from K to 12, depending on the camp and where it's located. We have a program where we place mentors in schools. We have an instrument program called Project Encore, where we repair donated instruments and then we place them into school districts. Right now, currently in South Florida, but we hope to expand. Of course, we have this Music Educators Conference. We have a program called Agents of Note, where we work with community leaders who are looking for performances for different like cocktail parties and tree lightings and different things that are happening. We even have a band that goes to the tarmac when we have a bowl game down here, and we bring out a marching band to welcome the football teams as they come to town. We also have a college scholarship that we award to one student each year. And then, of course, we work as much as we can to support the teachers that are within our network, which you are now part of. And we hope to continue to serve you as much as we can. I'd like to do a little bit of thank you. This is my commercial, but it's really the most important one, is where we thank the people that put all of this together. Of course, our organization was founded by Timlin and Casey Cole, the twin daughters of Nat King Cole, and because of them, our organization exists, and we so appreciate every moment that they give and that they continue to give in their family's legacy. And then our Edrick Rhodes here, our facilitator. This is your fourth year, right, Edrick? Yeah. You are an amazing, amazing person. We met Edrick when he was working down here in Palm Beach County, and now he's up at the Kennedy Center. So we are so appreciative and proud of you, Edrick. So thank you. And Terry, as you can see, our conductor in the middle, he used to work with us years and years ago at one of our camps at Lynn University. He's now at Broward College, and he's an amazing person. And we're so grateful for you, Terry. I know you're muted and you'll stay muted because you don't like to talk, but that's okay. Our keynote speaker this year, definitely, if you were not here the first day, take a look. Susan Magsamen. She is incredible. And I'm telling you that her book and the research and where she's going is going to make a difference in all of our lives. And it's going to be something that you, as educators, teachers, advocates for music education, you're going to be able to use that information to advocate on your own for what you're doing. And then, of course, as Edrick said, all of our presenters, I've learned so much. I learn so much every year, but we're grateful that you take the time to not only put it together, but to come here and present and to continue supporting music education. So we thank you for that. And then finally, the most important people in our lives, our music educators, our teachers, our mentors, the organizations that place music within your programming. We are grateful for you because music education is so vitally important for the children that we serve and the children that you serve. So on behalf of Nat King Cole Generation Hope and all of the children we serve and all of the children that you serve, thank you for what you do. And I'm going to hand it right back over to you, Edrick, and everyone have a great, great day.
Thank you, Shauna. I appreciate all of the kind words you've said and what work you've done for Nat King Cole Generation Hope and music education across the country. I've had the pleasure of knowing and collaborating with Shauna for over 10 years. She's an incredible woman and a dear friend who possesses an immense passion for music education and children. So much love to you and your team. So a few months ago, during our planning team's brainstorming session, we unanimously recognized the significance of music education in nurturing the holistic development for every child. This realization led us to choose this year's theme, music education now more than ever. By fostering cognitive, emotional, and social development, promote academic success, and enriching cultural understandings, music education plays a pivotal role in shaping the well-rounded individual. We all know that music education stands as an essential component of comprehensive education, equipping students with the skills they need for fulfilling a successful future. But I wanted to just take a moment to acknowledge that because the work that we do is really you can't put a time to it, a timetable, but just taking a moment to reflect as we embark, like I said, on another school year. I wanted to just take a moment to explain why we came up with this theme and how we came about it. So thank you for that time. So with that being said, our first session today is entitled Programming Perspectives from a Retired Orchestra Director and a Current Composer with Karel Butz. Karel is originally from Seattle and is a classically trained violinist, published orchestra composer, and former music educator and published author with Oxford University Press. He enjoys hiking, running, cycling, physical fitness, and traveling to explore new cities. And also in his time, he has run 2 marathons and also volunteers with the Houston Food Bank. It is an honor to have you with us, Karel. Thank you for being with us this morning. We look forward to hearing your session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and share my ideas about programming with all of you. So I want to give a little bit of a background about me so you know how my whole philosophy comes about when I talk about orchestral programming. He is correct. Yes, I do look like a retired orchestra director. I am young. I have left the teaching music education field for public school orchestra, but I still do private lessons. I still do instructional coaching for several of the school districts here in the Houston area. And I do a lot of guest conducting and guest speaking around the country. So I'm very much still involved with the orchestra scene. It's just that the day-to-day regular public school orchestra, I'm no longer a part of. The bottom line, when we talk about programming, it's real simple. We don't want to over-program and we want to program well. Those are the two things that we think about. But there's a lot that goes into it. And particularly, I think back to when I first started teaching, my mind was completely overwhelmed with, like, where do I start? What should I do? It was really difficult for me to figure out at first what items I should consider in going forward to making good programming selections for the groups that I was teaching at that time. So the bottom line is your programming is tied to your teaching philosophy. And that's going to ultimately determine what you do or you don't program for your ensemble. Programming is very, very near and dear to my heart because what we program for our ensembles is essentially our curriculum for our orchestra director. And so we're going to allocate most often 3 to 4 months of a school year towards a specific program if we're going to play that program well. So it's really essential that we as orchestra directors really have a philosophy, we have an objectives, we have some guidelines, we have some thoughts that we've taken a lot of time really diving into why we want to program certain pieces in literature for our students, because that is essentially what we're going to be working on for a majority of the year. What influences our programming? It's our past experiences in ensembles. And I'm going to talk first person. For me, as a classical violinist, I think about what was programmed for me when I was in school orchestra as a secondary student, what was programmed when I was in youth symphony, what was programmed for me when I was taking violin lessons with, Seattle Symphony musicians, what was programmed for me when I went to Indiana University School of Music, what did I play in the orchestras? And then I think about, okay, so there's all these places that I went. What were the programs that I participated in? What were my experiences? What did I discover? How did I see the directors react to the music? What was my experience emotionally when I played the music? Blah, blah, blah. That goes on and on and on. And it kind of informs for me what pieces to program, to continue to program or not to program because of past experiences. And that goes for any musician. So it's important that we reflect as a music educator as to what are your past experiences with being in an ensemble, what did and what did not work, and what do you want your students to accomplish, and what do you want your students to experience? Also, some of our programs are themed concerts, a Halloween concert, a classics concert, a pops concert, easy listening, children's concerts, audience favorites, celebrating music from Asia, Latin America, you name it, women composers, underrepresented composers, living composers. So when we're diving into particular themed concerts, it's important that while we're consolidating our search for repertoire to perform, that we really are also engaging the students to their best potential, that we're looking for quality literature within that genre. It's also influenced by present day likes. If you go on to J.W. Pepper or Alfred Music, for example, or Musica Propria, or any major publisher, and you see their top picks, or you see the editor's choice, and suddenly this piece becomes, fashionable to play and trendy to play, but it's usually short-lived, maybe 1 to 3 years. And then there's a new piece out that's, the rage to perform. So programming selections are made a lot by publishers, and this is composer speaking here. Publishers like to push out what's new. It's also important that we take into consideration that our programming selections is influenced by our community and school needs. It's important that as a director that I look for music that a majority of my demographic would be able to relate to, or that it represents the cultural makeup of what my ensemble looks like. For example, recently here in Texas, they've now added mariachi to an all-state experience, and they've had invited mariachi groups at the Texas Music Educator Association conference. So in my mind, I'm thinking it's about time, but that has opened a whole new avenue for musicians who might not participate in a school orchestra program per se, but they are really excellent and they excel and they understand the mariachi groups. And there's several groups here in Houston that have just really taken off and doing incredibly well. So here are some self-directed questions that I recommend that we ask ourselves as music educators when making a programming decision. The first one is ultimately, how polished do you want your ensemble to sound? How good do you want them to sound? The next one I ask is, are the selected works or the works being considered, are they realistic for your students? Are they going to be able to handle this piece well? Does the group have the potential to understand musically and emotionally how this piece should be conveyed to an audience? And then as a conductor, we have a huge obligation to help our musicians understand not just the notes and the rhythms, but also how to convey human emotions through the music. So can we as a conductor, do we understand the literature well? Can we perform it? If we sit down at the piano, can we play the score? Can we talk freely and knowledgeably about what were the social factors, what were the political factors, or do we know anything about the composer who wrote this piece? And I say this because when I go clinic orchestras, I typically like to ask the orchestras, like, what do you know about this piece? Or have you been read the program notes provided in the score to this piece? And not to poo-poo directors, but usually 8 times out of 10, the students are unaware of what the piece is about. They have no idea why the composer wrote it, who the composer was, if the composer is even living, or what surrounded the piece, what was the background, and what was the inspiration for the composer to actually sit down and try to convey some humanity through these written notes. So when I approach trying to figure out how to program, it's important that I ask these questions. What do I want my group to sound like? Do they have the potential? Do I, as a director, have the potential and the ability to really serve justice to this piece and perform this piece with integrity to the composer's intent? The next thing I also challenge us to think about as directors for our school ensembles is, what are your needs versus your wants? Yes, we want to perform, original works, or we perhaps have a piece or some sort of a themed concert in mind. Like, I want to do that. But it's important too that we always have what I call just a reality check. Like, what does your group need? In terms of needs, what do they need in order to get to what you want? So let's pick a piece. Let's just say a generic, I want to do Beethoven's First Symphony for my high school fall concert. Well, that's my want. I would want to do that. But let's suppose I arrive in the first day of school, I discover my students are still struggling playing in first position. We can't even get into other positions without just the basic understanding of first position. Well, then suddenly my wants is no longer really going to be an option. I have to work carefully to address the needs of the group, to work on the technical skills, the musical skills, the oral development of the skill of the students, so their ears are strengthening. So it's important that we allow ourselves the ability to program for our ensembles, knowing what they need at that time. They really need this, and I want them to be able to do this. In order for them to arrive at this want, we're going to need to do this. The next thing too, when addressing programming, it's really important to let go of the ego as a director. And there's nothing wrong with having an ego and having some, ability to be like, I want to do this, I'm proud of this, I would love to do this, and that's great. However, when I say let go of the ego, it means that we need to step down and really meet the students at where they're at. My experience has been, I've taught all demographics, I've taught all environments, from incredibly poor demographic to where they need, funding to get their instruments, all the way up to what one might consider a very rich demographic, where a majority of the students have the ability to study privately, participate in youth symphony, enhance their music education with, participating in choirs outside of school, this and that, and it's very rich. So I've taught many different campuses, and I had a big kind of come to Jesus moment, so to speak, when I went from one school that was pretty well to do, and then I started teaching at another school. And in my mind, I was thinking, well, these junior hires should be able to do this because I was doing that previous campus, but they could not. And I had to, address my ego and say, okay, this is not happening. So what do I need to do? I need to realize Rome was not built in a day. What do I need for my students right now? How can I help them? I need to meet them at their level. I need to be their cheerleader, so to speak. I need to really take a look at what I'm doing, address any inadequacies with my teaching in order to help the students to succeed, so they can ultimately get to what I would want them to perform. And they did get to that point, and we worked really hard, and I had a great time with that group. So it's important that we take time as directors to bring a piece to life, that we know the piece well, that we understand the history surrounding the music that we're teaching, that we know what the composer is, what their life is like. We know why was the piece written? What is the skill level required? Yes, publishers often put grade levels on the front cover. If we look at state lists, it's categorized by state levels, 1 through 6, typically 6 being the more advanced. But often, I can say this as a composer, I've had pieces that were considered grade 4, but I've had professional orchestras perform them in grade 4, grade 1, whatever grade it is. Music is music. A concert D is a concert D. Good sound is good sound, and it doesn't matter the difficulty level. We have to perform music well. And so it's important when making programming decisions that we're allowing our musicians to be successful and to have a positive experience. All this is saying my philosophy. My philosophy is shaped by 3 pedagogues, Suzuki, who championed the mother tongue philosophy, where when you're surrounded and immersed in a musical environment, you become just this elevated musician. Just as a child learns to speak by being surrounded by people speaking, so too do musicians learn music by being around musicians, by listening. And Suzuki is sequential and mastery, and I'm a big proponent of that. So that goes into a lot of our programming decisions, like how well do we want our students to master skills? Mimi Zweig, who is professor of violin at Indiana University, I studied violin with her, but also I worked closely with her and taught alongside her at the Indiana University String Academy, which is the pre-college program for ages 5 through 18. And that was very eye-opening, and that really got me hooked onto teaching strings. One thing about Mimi that I very much admire about her is that she's not Suzuki trained or just a Suzuki teacher. She's not allegiant to one method. She's always open to commissioning new works for the students. I think David Baker, who was one of the great jazz legends at Indiana at the time, wrote a lot of jazz style pieces for the violin virtuosi. She's constantly seeking new repertoire that's appropriate for the skill level of her students. But then also she uses, traditional violin concerto sequence that Dorothy DeLay used at the Juilliard School. Paul Rowland is another pedagogue that influences me because he taught the teaching of string action or a teaching of action and string playing. And he taught at the University of Illinois. And his whole philosophy was, just as children play, we can bring that play into the music making. So all this to say is that, for example, Paul Rowland believed that you could teach 3/4, 5/4 odd meters to young students just as easily as you could 2/4/4/4 time signatures. And the reason I say this is because I've had discussions with colleagues who I very much admire, but it's interesting to hear their opinions. And one in particular is very vocal and adamant that 3/4 and compound time should not be introduced until the second year of playing. Whereas I have had much success with my beginning students playing 3/4 time for a fall concert within the first 6 weeks of playing. So, it's just, this just goes to show again that our philosophy shapes what we think is appropriate and what we know can be accomplished by our students in regards to programming. Also, one of my mantras is excellence lives here. When I was teaching, it was all over our school shirts. It was all over the room. It was just our mantra in terms of work ethic, determination, camaraderie, proper practice habits, superb listening skills. We taught students, that they might have to sacrifice some of their personal time in order to make a piece come to life well for a concert. And then also teaching students incredible technical skills. All this to say that programming, like I mentioned, is your curriculum. It needs to go hand in hand. I want students to have a challenge. I want them to learn something in a sequential manner that allows them to develop those listening skills, that allows them to develop proper practice habits. I think jumping hoops or jumping, just around with different techniques that the students aren't quite ready for yet can be damaging to their ability to play well and to ultimately make music for life. And that leads to my next section is why. Like, why do we make music and why is programming so important? Well, for me, my why in teaching, and I still teach, is I want students to be able to enjoy lifelong music making. I want them to be able to leave my private lesson. I want them to be able to leave my classroom walls and be able to go out there and just have the ability to play for fun, for leisure, in a community group, you name it. So it's important that when we program that we're thinking about what are the left and right hand techniques in orchestra. I'm talking orchestra, not band or choir, but what are the left or right hand techniques that allow students to play with phrasing, to play with dynamics, and to think about ensemble blend. I think lifelong musicians know that pieces performed incredibly well align with the integrity of the composer's intent with which a piece was composed. And so in order to leave an emotional impact on the listener, if I'm going to play a Barber's Adagios for strings, then we are going to need to be able to play that with such an emotional impact, with intense vibrato, with different vibrato speeds, superb bowing technique, amazing left hand technique in order to play in all these flats, you name it. It goes on and on and on. I have to be able, and musicians have to be able to know what's required of them in order to play a piece quite well. I believe that quality is better than quantity. I think this gets into over programming. I've had experiences where I've been a performer where we've just had way too many notes and not enough time to really learn the notes well. We kind of hack ourselves through the concert, and it's just not really a pleasant experience for the musicians. And I sometimes wonder if the audience enjoyed it equally as well. So I think it's important that we teach quality, that we give students pieces that really, again, go back to helping them learn. It's not about the difficulty of the literature, so to speak, but what are the technical skills and the musical skills that the students are going to learn while learning this piece of music. It's important too to avoid a negative competitive environment. I have experienced growing up with a lot of competitions. I think back to my high school years and college years in a conservatory setting where so-and-so, your peer is playing this concerto, you should be playing this concerto. If you're not, then there's something wrong, or you're not as good, even though you're not at the same track, so to speak. Let's think about school orchestras when we go into competition setting. Here in Texas, we have every year there's a state competition for honor orchestra. And at first, when I moved to Texas, I was like, wow, this is incredible hearing the state honor groups. And they are incredible, don't get me wrong. But there is kind of an underlying negative structure to that system. And no one really talks about it, but I'll talk about it because I've been in it, where other directors will kind of poo-poo another school program because they're not playing grade 4 or 5 literature when they need to be playing grade 4 or 5 literature in order to win state. Well, perhaps that school's not ready for grade 4 and 5 literature. Perhaps there'll never be a state ensemble, but that's a want, that's not a need. And so for me, I'm at a point where I just need to remove myself from that and think, okay, so what do the students need? What do they need? It's not about my ego. It's not about putting myself out there that I'm the greatest conductor and we won and we're so great and look what we performed and we're number one. great. But at the end of the day, if I want lifelong musicianship to happen, it's so important that I address what do the students need at this point in time so that they can be successful and truly enjoy music. And to me, I think that's what it's all about. Competition is healthy. I think it can be good, but just want to clarify when it pits groups against one another based on programming selections or what other people think they should be programming, or they didn't program this selection or this or that or this or that. I think that can really hinder musical development altogether. Big goal. When programming, here are some big goals I ask myself. So one is, what's the goal of performing this piece? 2, what technical mastery can be accomplished? Remember that Suzuki goal. 3, what are the pitfalls in this piece? And scrutinize the score. Not every composer is perfect. There's going to be some stuff that you're going to have to be like, ooh, wow, that could be a challenge, but I think my group can handle this, but I know this is going to be a pitfall. And let me strategize right now how I can overcome that. Is there enough interest for all players? Let's face it, typically in a string orchestra world, the second violin and viola section gets a little bit neglected. They have very important roles, but often the melody line is gone. So from the lens of a school director, but also a composer, I strategize and I really try my best as a composer to make every single part very interesting, that they get some sort of melodic idea, and that every section is very important. The next thing I ask myself is, does it promote musicianship? Does it allow the opportunity for students to develop their ability to convey human emotion? Again, this goes back to the Suzuki method. Suzuki himself, it's more of a philosophy. He was really adamant about creating beautiful souls in young children, making sure that they were developed wonderfully as human beings. Next, I think about, will the audience appreciate it? Will they understand how each piece lends itself to the next piece? Also, we talked about this earlier, but reflect on the background and the culture of the music, so the performers are well aware of what's going on. And then I think it's important to also tie in the social and the historical events that surround a piece, so you can really kind of bring some humanity into it. I say this because for my experience has been, I've taught high school, but the majority of my public school teaching has been junior high. It's hard to, and here's a recent example. I had a violin student come to me who wanted to take the audition for the Houston Youth Symphony. I think that's great. Problem I discovered quickly was the parent was adamant that they audition for the top group. Well, the top group excerpt last May was the 4th movement of the Brahms Symphony 4, which is incredibly difficult. And that's going to be on any excerpt for any major orchestra. This is a 10-year-old trying to play Brahms 4, which technically was a stretch. And so that was strike 1. It was just like not working. Strike 2 is we were jumping over so many details and technical facility that needed to be addressed in order to perform this Brahms 4. So we were essentially losing valuable lesson time because the parent was adamant and would not let me do anything other than teach this piece. And then the next thing is the emotional ability to perform Brahms 4. Brahms is like aged wine and aged cheese. I mean, you got to live through a lot of life experience to really now truly play Brahms very, very well. Not to say that a 10-year-old can't ever play Brahms with the depth and maturity, but I think anyone would agree that there are certain composers and certain pieces that the more you just stick with it and you bring it out of the woodwork, so to speak, like later in life, it just has a unique feel to it and you're able to play it probably with how the composer felt. So all this to say is that these items are important. And when you're programming, think about what your goals are and think about what you want to address. And then also think about the maturity level of the group that you're programming for. So there's components that are associated with programming that are kind of just call them teaching components. One is I want to develop confident players and confident humans. So if I overprogram, for example, with this Brahms 4 excerpt, and I'm not developing confidence in this student. I don't think this student made the U Symphony because I haven't heard, honestly, whether or not they did or not, but I doubt they made it just because it was just too difficult for them. They're not confident. So that can strike down a person's confidence in performing well. And then I also want to, through programming, develop leadership skills. I want the leaders in the group to be able to play the piece well, to guide their peers, and I want everyone in the orchestra to become accountable and learning the part to the best of their ability. I don't want the last stand to be kind of faking it through. I want everyone in the orchestra, regardless of where they sit, to know their music very, very well. And through that, the students are developing responsible and mature attitudes. And so those are byproducts of what I consider proper programming. So what is over-programming? Over-programming, textbook definition, I think it's something that ultimately causes stress and anxiety because there's too much. It's too many activities, too much to consider at once. It's too rigid. It doesn't allow time for the orchestra to really dive into the musicianship required to play a piece well. Again, it typically over-programming, my experience has been what I've seen, and also experience playing in an orchestra, it typically satisfies only the conductor ego. Or where someone, director, thinks in order to elevate the standard, we need to perform this XYZ piece because we want to outdo what we did in the past, and every year our group is getting better. But perhaps they're not. Perhaps it's the same group, the same needs. Students graduate, you still have the same needs coming in. So it's important, again, to assume that you don't know what students are capable of doing until you really meet them in life. So I say that because an example would be, how do you determine, I think one of the questions I get asked a lot is like, so then, all this, that's great, we understand, but how do you determine when it's appropriate to program a piece for a student? So here's another example. Just recently, I had a new violin student come to me, plays very well, set up well, gets a decent tone. We've been doing a lot of technical facility exercises, just going back to the drawing board with getting a larger tone, trying to cross over from intermediate to advanced sound. Junior high student, he brought the Bruch finale, the Bruch Violin Concerto. And so then, after we go through all the technical studies, it's time to get to our solo. And he had trouble playing it. It just kind of frozen, was a little bit shy. And I thought, well, maybe, it's just a little intimidating to perform for, me at the first lesson, which I get, which is typical, first lessons, sometimes students lock up, they just get a little bit stage fright. But by the second week, the third week of him working on this Bruch Concerto, I realized this is a little bit beyond what you can handle. We're still scrambling, searching for notes, and it's just not what they need. He wants to perform it, but it's not a need. So scratch that, go back. So now we're doing Wieniawski, the Obertost Mazurka, which is a little bit more friendly, which can work on the double stops, which is more accessible, which allows room to breathe, and it serves as a building block so we can go back into the Bruch. Another example is I had last year a student who came to me who was in Suzuki Book 4. I was like, wow, that's fantastic, that's amazing. So I was thinking, well, if they're in Book 4, then this is typically the A2 books that kind of go along with Suzuki Book 4. So listen to her. But week after week, I noticed that there was lack of keeping the bow parallel to the bridge. There was real frustration with understanding key signatures. There was real frustration with keeping a steady tempo. which meant that we were searching for notes, which ultimately I discovered she did not know how to read music. Everything had been taught by rote. She was just given photocopies of Suzuki book, and the teacher just kind of spoon-fed these notes and just rushed through stuff, but the student was not understanding fingerboard geography and all the basic skills that we learned from day one if they were a part of my school orchestra. So, that's a situation where for me, it's kind of like, all right, so we're going to go back, and I explained to the parent, just in a positive manner, is like, it's too advanced right now. We will get to this point. We will play this solo in the future, but what we really need to go back is we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to, address our posture. We need to get that sound going. And I want you to be successful. And so I phrased it as positive as I could, got the parent on board, and we went all the way back to the Twinkle variations in Suzuki Book 1 and just started over again. And you know what? She made the decision, and I applaud this student. She's grade 3. She made the decision that she was going to do and that takes a lot of trust. And I very much appreciate the parents and the students who trust us as directors that we do know what we're doing, that we put thought into it. And I think students begin to trust us, and they know and they value our decision making when we make wise programming decisions, because students are brilliant. They know when they're not meeting standards. They know when they're struggling. They can tell when a director's lying to them and say, oh, that's great. Good job. You sound so good, when they know, no, it's not. That's not a good sound. We don't sound good. We didn't really learn it. We did not master it. So I think it's important that we not, lie, so to speak, to the students, but we owe it to our families and our community and our students and ourselves to program pieces where students feel confident. And now I'm happy to say that violin student who was on the struggle bus, we went back to visit Suzuki Book 1. We're back now all the way up to Book 3. So we're getting there, but I tell you what, the progress is significant. And you just kind of have to go with your instincts and say, okay, let's step back. We've overprogrammed and we need to readdress these items. The danger in overprogramming is this: there's a crippling self-doubt. There's a thing called self-fulfilled prophecy. And so ultimately what that means is that the student starts to believe that they will start to do this particular thing, or they get into this mindset. So one of my self-fulfilled prophecies growing up, my testimony time, is I had a really, typically in high school, I would get stage fright for auditions for some reason. I was fine everywhere else, but for auditions, I would just get the shaky bow arm syndrome. And that just kind of became a self-fulfilled prophecy. As soon as I heard audition, I knew that I'm going to shake, I'm going to get nervous. And it just would be something that my mind would feed myself. And I would get all this anxiety over something just because I, at that time in high school, was performing. Now that I look back at it, I was performing literature that I was not technically ready for. I had a violin teacher and director that was just, skipping me from here to there, to there, to there. It wasn't very sequential, and there were a lot of missing gaps in information. So all that to say is that through college and through a lot of what I call rehab work, working with Mimi Zweig, who's excellent with technique, I was able to correct that, and with correct programming, overcome those negatives. Correct programming allows this. This is what correct programming allows. Ultimately, it allows us to feel free. It eliminates tension. It eliminates the physical tension in our body. It eliminates the psychological tension in our body. And then it allows students to get beyond the notes and the rhythms. It allows us to perform in a more rhapsodic fashion. Have you ever been in a concert where it just feels so good? It's like, wow, we could just randomly take time here. We could take more rubato here. We didn't feel rushed. We did something totally that we've never done before, but everyone was there with you. And it was so fun. And you could tell that the performers were having fun. The audience, as a result, was like, wow, that's totally amazing. It allows students to perform without stress and to perform incredibly well. I alluded to this a little while ago. Regardless of grade level, it's important that we perform pieces to the best of their ability. And I say this is because one of the pieces that I wrote that was performed at the Midwest Clinic in Chicago, it's a grade 2 piece called Journey. And it was originally commissioned by a middle school orchestra. And at that time, I wrote the piece knowing that, okay, so for middle school, what they need is this technique, blah, blah, blah. But I know this piece could be played really, really with more advanced fingerings at a high school level. So it could be pulled out through the, for high school groups that are working on, unique fingering patterns or different type of bow styles. And so a high school performed it at the Midwest Clinic. And I remember some of the directors coming up, exchanging pleasantries and talking to me afterwards. And they said, "Are you sure that's a grade 2? Sounds more difficult than a grade 2. And I think that to me is a very much a compliment. When you can perform something that is allegedly simple, but make it sound so incredibly rich in tone, rich in musicality, that the audience is just transported into this, wow, this is such a mature sounding group. And I think that speaks volumes when you're able to do that regardless of grade level. But I want to let you know too that, as a composer, I to this day, if someone says, can you write a grade 1 piece or a grade 2 piece, I think those are the more difficult pieces to write, because there's such a limited vocabulary, technically speaking, typically for the string orchestra, that they can handle at that age. But I also want the music to be not dorky sounding. I don't want to just give them a D major scale and then pass it from first violin to cello, but I want to make it sound rich. I want to make it sound like, these beginning students could, you could give this piece to Chicago Symphony, would just sound just as well, in terms of like, wow, this sounds so harmonically interesting. Okay, realistic expectations. I think, it's important that you don't program something until you know the skill level, that you know the maturity level of the ensemble, and that you know how your rehearsals are going. So you need to gauge as a director, like, how effective are the rehearsals going? Am I chasing after discipline issues? Are there frequent interruptions to my rehearsals because students just stop playing because they just fall apart? There's lack of practice in the ensemble. Is my ensemble focused? Are we going to be able to do this type of work with the type of focus and maturity that's required? Right now, for example, I've been asked to be a guest conductor for a region honor orchestra here in Texas. So one of the things that I have to do then is I'm talking with the directors in that region and asking them what worked in the past, what have you programmed in the past, and then ask the directors, do a little background search without the region directors knowing, but I'll ask the directors, what was your experience doing those pieces? Did it work? Was it too challenging? What are your thoughts? What do you see coming through that region? And ultimately, what that allows me to do is then find literature that is most likely to be appropriate for that ensemble. So that's for guest conducting. Now, let's say you have your own program. What do you do? I would take the first couple weeks in your school year and do a lot of technical work, a lot of technical review, gauge to see what the strengths and the weaknesses are. Use summertime, do a lot of listening, go to a lot of conventions, look at a lot of the state lists, see what's out there, see what's available, what's new, what's tried and true. You can go to uiltexas.org and look at what we call the prescribed music list. You can see all these pieces that are performed. You can go to UIL results, just Google it, and you can see all these schools, orchestras, bands, choirs. You begin to pick up on themes. You can see what pieces are programmed the most. You can see what the ratings were. You can typically see that a composer might be a popular one, probably because that composer writes well for the orchestra. And so directors begin to notice. As a director too, I do a lot of chit chat with other directors. I want to see, I want to learn. I figure out who are the mentors that I want to be surrounded by. if I want my program to be excellent, what are the other excellent programs that are local that I could perhaps go observe? Could I schedule a coffee with one of the directors and talk to them and shop talk and talk to them what works, what have you seen in the past? And then also too, I think, and I think there's nothing wrong with sending a message to Doug Spada, Bryan Ballmages. You can send a text to me. You can write to Susan Monday. You can, all these living composers that are, you know, commonly published by, you know, Alfred or FJH or KJOS, you know, reach out to the composers. You'd be surprised how much we like it when someone asks us a question or is curious if we have anything coming soon, or what are your thoughts on this or that? And then also belonging to online forums. There's a lot of Facebook community groups for orchestra teachers and performers alike that constantly are talking about programming. And it's important that it's done in a positive, you know, manner. But what works? What are the challenges? Teaching orchestra, there's GIA Publications has teaching repertoire through, gosh, I just blinked out on the book. Anyway, GIA has these books that you can go through, and there's different pieces, and there's directors have broken down the pieces. They've talked about the background of the pieces and the composers, you name it, everything that I was just talking about earlier. But they pick some of the top pieces, so it makes it easy for school orchestra teachers to see what's out there. So that's important when you're thinking about what and how to go about programming for your school groups. So here are the main questions to ask when you're programming for your school group, okay? What is the performance date and what's the event? It's important to map out your agenda. So again, I think it's important to address what are your needs and what are your wants. It's generally a good idea to say by the end of the year, I want to be here. Right now in September, we are needing, this is our needs right here, here's our wants, and get those wants written out as well, because that becomes your goal. Without goals, teaching becomes pretty boring. Is it a regular concert? Is it background concert, background music concert? Like, are you playing at like a cocktail party, for example? What's the level of importance? How clean and polished does your performance need to be? Do you have the time to prepare for it? And then here's another strategy that I find to work really well with big works that need time to gel and blossom. And I learned this from violinist Hilary Hahn. And she proposes the idea, and she still does this today, of learning a concerto well, giving it a couple informal, you know, performances, setting it aside, going to new works, and then several months later, bringing that work back out and starting to resurrect it and bringing it back to life. It gives you a renewed perspective, and typically it's a lot easier to play because your technique is better. But then also it gives you a ability to play something with a little bit more emotional maturity. So that's one strategy as well. It's important to look at instrumental concerns. Can you find the strengths in your ensemble without holding weaker sections back? If there is a weak section, is there writing in the pieces that can help the weaker sections not sound weak, so to speak? Are you featuring soloists? What are your key players? Are you going to promote musical growth in all of your players and not just feature just one hotshot soloist? So does the orchestral writing, is it interesting for the 2D sections? What's the technical facility of the performers? Do they have the chops, so to speak? Is it age appropriate? Can the students successfully practice at home and understand and come to subsequent classroom rehearsals understanding the piece? How much are you invested in this piece of music to perform it well? Next, what's the instrumentation? Are the parts doubled? Are there any missing parts? Unfortunately, sometimes high school top groups are short on a double bass. And so one of the things that I've learned is what works well is performing a string quartet and realizing it for a string chamber orchestra. So there are ways to work around it. And some publishers have compilations of books when it comes time for solo and ensemble contests, where you can have the same piece written in duet, trio, quartet, or large ensemble form. So as an ensemble, you can all learn these parts together, and then you can, divide the class into their respective ensemble sizes. Last, it's important to reflect after doing all these steps and processes into going into programming. And I think self-reflection is something that needs to be done daily. You need to ask, is the piece working? Is this working for the group? Is the group receiving enough challenge? Were they challenged enough? Was it rewarding, or did we feel panicked? Is this piece, or is the composer worthy of being performed again? Should I reach out to the composer and see if they might want to commission a work for our orchestra? And then ultimately, did this enhance my overall curriculum, my goal? Did it lead to my wants? So those are some suggestions I have for finding proper pieces to make your program appropriate for your ensemble versus over programming. I know we're short on time. I think wow, it's already time, but I could go on and on and on. But just to wrap it up, I think the ultimate thing is to make sure that that you spend time, and that we spend time, and that I spend time just listening and being immersed and open to new ideas. I think it's important to, as a director, listening to new music. When I'm at the gym working out, for example, that's a perfect time to go into Apple Classical or Apple anything in music, or Pandora, you name it, and just explore the different genres. Go on YouTube. It's just a rabbit hole of what's out there, and just think of ideas. And then when you hear something, for me, I'm like, wow, that's really cool. I wonder if you can think of another school group that might have performed it, and ask that director, have you heard of this piece? And sometimes they have, and they have connections to get the music to that. And so it's just, you realize how intertwined our music community is, and really how small and how exciting it is to be part of a group of musicians that wants their school orchestras to really flourish and do well, and support one another by giving suggestions and ideas for helping students to really, really do well and succeed. And that comes, again, down to programming well for the school orchestra. I do need to wrap up the time. If you guys have any questions, you could put them in the chat, and I'd be happy to answer them. If not, if you have no questions, I can put my email in the chat, and you guys are welcome to email me directly, and I'm happy to talk with you. But looks like I have no questions. So that was a lot. I hope it made some sense. And I can't hear.
I'm back. Here I am.
Okay.
No, you were spot on. It was well needed. It's such a it's a sensitive topic, because sometimes, as you said in the very beginning, it's the root of our ego, personal ego. I've clinicianed a band program, and worked around the country, and we've played some of these grade 6 musics. I mean, just I can name tons of them. I mean, the Man's Lenkas, any of those pieces, and then we'll play, like, I don't know, as you mentioned, Brahms, Blessed Are They, which is a grade 4 piece of music, and we can't get through it. And or they feel exhausted playing that piece, which is not as technical as a grade 6 piece of technical piece, but it requires so much. So when you said it's almost like aged cheese, it is, because it's a different requirement, and not necessarily you can get more work out of a grade 4 that demands the musicianship, and not necessarily always a technician. How many notes can you play really fast? And I've worked with a lot of students individually, and sometimes they'll play so fast but not have any center pulse, but they can play every single note. And I'm like, with that, it's what you mentioned before, quantity over quality, and we have to find that even balance. So we can go on and on and on. I'm going to email you, because I love talking this stuff. We were talking about this earlier, and just all the nuggets you were providing was just so spot on, and we greatly appreciate that.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. So on behalf of the Nat King Cole Generation Hope, we thank you again so much for sharing your expertise, Karl, and your time today. And please, I hope you reach out to him. And you know, I always say this when I go to conferences, this should not be a one and done where we'll see each other next year. You know, we are trying to build a community because we work in such a singleton profession, and we want to find those resources. And so we use this as an opportunity when we share our email addresses so we can continue on having dialogue after the 1 hour, because we know it can go on and on and on. So I'm glad Karl shared his email address, and we'll take it from there. We're going to take a very short break. We'll start our next session in the next 5 minutes promptly. Thank you very much. Be back shortly.